And we are on. We say all praises be to the Creator, all power to His people. In the name of Yahshua, the Black Revolutionary Messiah, I greet you, my brothers and sisters, in the spirit of truth and the words of peace. Shalom Aleichem. Giving a special salute to the Black Messiahs. Our motto is stop waiting for a Savior and be one. Stop waiting for a Savior and be one. Tonight, dealing with a topic that is on the minds of a lot of people. And it has been on the minds of a lot of people for generations. But very few people have dared to talk about it. The subject tonight is Whoopi Goldberg and the truth about Black-Jewish relations. The truth about Black-Jewish relations. For the last week, Whoopi Goldberg has been in the news. She's the latest one to feel the onslaught for words she said. But many people are confused. Many people don't know, what did she say? It's really not about Whoopi Goldberg tonight. It's really about the true history that has been hidden from us in regards to Black and Jewish relations. What's the truth from our perspective, from a Black perspective? Let's get started. Before we even start dealing with the subject, we have to get our definition straight. We have to get the definition straight. First of all, Judaism is not a race. It's a religion. Now, if you're in power, you can make anything into a race if you want to. They made hip-hop a race just because they felt like it. But Judaism is a religion, a belief system, not a race by definition. Also, they accuse Whoopi Goldberg and others of being anti-Semitic. A Semite is a group of languages that were spoken in the so-called Middle East or Northeast Africa. Northeast Africa, in that area, those were Semitic languages. So Jew is a religion. Semite is a language. Let's get it out the way first. Let's get that out the way first. So, what is all the controversy about Black and Jewish relationships? Let's start with slavery. Let's start with slavery. One of the things that has been the topic of the most controversy is whether or not the European, well, let's start somewhere else now. Let's deal with what is and who is a Jew. And I got my sources tonight. And I hope you got your pen and pads ready, because I'm coming with the sources tonight. Like I said, Judaism is a religion. Read this book, Arthur Koestler, The 13th Tribe. Arthur Koestler, The 13th Tribe. Ella Hughley, The Truth About the Black Biblical Hebrew Israelites. Stephen Jacobs, The Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa. Joseph Williams, Hebrewisms of West Africa. Dr. Yosef ben Jochannan, We the Black Jews. And The African Origins of Modern Religion by Jose Malcioln. These books will prove without a shadow of a doubt that Judaism is a religion practiced by many people. Many people in Africa, many tribes in Africa have Hebrewic roots. So I hope you got your pen and paper tonight and can take down the name of these books. So when you're challenged on the subject, you can bring out the documentation. See, a lot of times we like to talk from emotion. We like to talk from emotion, but you got to have your facts straight. You got to have the receipts. You got to have the paperwork. Judaism was practiced by people all over the world. It's a religion that started in Africa. Started in Africa, Northeast Africa. Now, back to what I was talking about. A lot of people get upset when you start talking about the Jewish involvement in the slave trade. Because when you start talking about the Jewish involvement in the slave trade, that kind of breaks apart their morality. They don't want to talk about the Jewish involvement in the slave trade, but I suggest this book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, by the research group of the Nation of Islam. Because what they do is they flip the script. They flip the script and they start talking about, well, only a small percentage of the population of European Jews own slaves. That's not the question. Because as Harold Cruse teaches us in the book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, Harold Cruse in The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, he says that when it comes to slavery, American Jews as individuals were no different from other individual whites. Some Jews were against slavery, some Jews were abolitionists, while others were slave owners and slave traders. According to Cruse, as much as we may like to believe that Jews led the charge against the enslavement of African people as a collective, the Jewish community took no stand. During slavery, the Jewish community did not differentiate themselves from any other white folks. Some were abolitionists. Some fought against slavery, but others were slave owners. Now, according to Eli Evans, in his book, Judah P. Benjamin, the Jewish Confederate, 10,000 Jews fought for the Confederacy. 10,000 Jews fought for the Confederacy. And Judah P. Benjamin, who was an officer and a politician, but during the period I'm talking about, he was an officer in the Confederate Army. He's considered by many scholars as the brains of the Confederacy. A Jewish man, Judah P. Benjamin, is considered by many scholars as the brains of the Confederate Army. He was the brains behind it. So, you may ask yourself, how did the myth of this love affair between black people and Jewish people get started? We just said that some of them owned slaves, some of them were slave owners, some of them participated in the slave trade. So where did this myth of this black-Jewish alliance come from? Read this book, Broken Alliance by Jonathan Kaufman. This is the book that Dr. Collett was quoting from. Broken Alliance by Jonathan Kaufman. Very controversial book. In his book, he said that the kinship between blacks and Jews did not really take shape until after 1913, following the lynching of Leo Franks for allegedly raping and murdering a white girl. It was not until 1913 that European Jewish people, the white Jews, began to think they had more in common with black people, because Leo Frank, who was lynched on the testimony of a black man testified him, and he was lynched. It was not until then that the Jews felt they had something in common with black folks. Not doing slavery, it was not until the lynching of Leo Franks. The lynching of Leo Franks in 1913. This was shortly followed by the formation of the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL. Another thing I like to talk about is black anti-Semitism. That black people are anti-Semitic. Black people hate Jewish people. How did that get started? In the late 80s, there was an attack on the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan because of his defense of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. This was followed by the attack on Dr. Tony Martin. What did Dr. Tony Martin do wrong? Dr. Tony Martin had the audacity to use the secret relationship between blacks and Jews as part of his class syllabus at Wesley College. He also wrote this book that talks about his ordeal, The Jewish Onslaught, Dispatches from the Wesley Battlefront, by the late Dr. Tony Martin. So they attacked Dr. Tony Martin for using the relationship between blacks and Jews in his syllabus. They went on the attack. They also attacked, and we're talking about the early 90s, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. And the reason they attacked Dr. Leonard Jeffries was because he talked about the Jewish involvement in the slave trade. Called him all kind of names. Just because his documented research, using their own scholars, Dr. Leonard Jeffries talked about the transatlantic slave trade. So they were labeled as anti-Semites. Now, the funny thing about the whole idea of being an anti-Semite or being anti-Semitic, we already talked about how Semite really means a group of languages spoken by a lot of people, groups in the Palestine area. According to this book, The Troublemakers, by Arnold Forster and Benjamin Epstein. Arnold Forster and Benjamin Epstein. This book was actually put out by the Anti-Defamation League. Their own scholars. I'm using their own book. See, a lot of people don't know about this book, The Troublemakers, that was put out by the ADL. In this book, they talk about how around 1947, the anti-Semitic concept was introduced by a man named Benjamin Friedman. Benjamin Friedman. It wasn't Minister Farrakhan. It wasn't Professor Griff. It wasn't Nick Cannon. It wasn't Whoopi Goldberg. It was Benjamin Freeman, who really was the father of modern anti-Semitism. Benjamin Freeman. According to the book, around 1947, a specific anti-Semitic concept introduced by one troublemaker, Benjamin Freeman, soon becomes the stock and trade of anti-Semites around the country. And the thing about Benjamin Freeman, he was Jewish himself. So anytime they start talking about black anti-Semites in America, tell them that the documentation and the information and the talking points of anti-Semitism came from a Jewish man named Benjamin Freeman. Benjamin Freeman. They never talk about Benjamin Freeman. They never talk about Benjamin Freeman, but he was the father of anti-Semitism in the United States. And this is around 1947. Now, with that being the case, you will ask, why do Jewish people, why are they so bothered by black folks? Why, when our entertainers and politicians say one word, all eyes are on them? All eyes are on them. Where did this fear, like Public Enemy would say, where did this fear of a black planet come from? In 1963, a man named Norman Podhoretz, Podhoretz, he wrote an article called My Negro Problem and Ours. Norman Podhoretz, in 1963, wrote an essay called My Negro Problem and Ours. And that helped to spark the Jewish fear of black people. My Negro Problem and Ours. You can pull that up on the internet and read it yourself. My Negro Problem and Ours, once again by Norman Podhoretz. Norman Podhoretz. What did this fear of black folks translate into? In 1968, according to, I'm bringing the receipts. According to Jewish Identity and the ADL by Janet L. Dolgin. Janet L. Dolgin. She wrote this book in 1977. She says that the JDL, Jewish Defense League, was created by a small group of Orthodox Jews concerned with the explicitly particularistic issues of crime in the streets, black anti-Semitism, liberal do-nothing government, and changing neighborhoods. According to her, the JDL, and I quote, began in a large part as a defense against emerging black power. The JDL, the Jewish Defense League, was created in 1968 as a counter to the Black Power movement. They were afraid of the Black Power movement. They were afraid of the Black Panthers. They were afraid of the Nation of Islam. They were afraid of other groups, so they formed the Jewish Defense League. They formed the Jewish Defense League. Also during that time, they used a poem by a 15-year-old black girl called Anti-Semitism, dedicated to Albert Shanker as an example of black hatred towards Jewish people. One of the first people that they used as the poster child for the Jewish black hatred of Jewish people was a 15-year-old black girl who wrote a poem called Anti-Semitism, dedicated to Albert Shanker. They used that in 1968 as a prime example of black so-called anti-Semitism. Although many people see Jewish Americans as allies of Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, when it came to African Americans exerting control that challenged Jewish economic, political, and social dominance in areas such as education and affirmative action, fast friends soon became faster enemies. They like to talk about how so many Jewish Americans were involved with Martin Luther King and saying we shall overcome with Dr. Martin Luther King. But anytime it threatened them economically or politically, they became enemies. An example is the Ocean Hill, Brownsville protests in New York in 1968, where black people wanted control over the education in their neighborhoods. When it began to threaten Jewish teachers, they turned against their black allies. Also, in regards to things like affirmative action, many leading Jewish groups opposed affirmative action, as evidenced by the 1978 Bakke, B-A-K-K-E case. Anytime they start talking about alliances and how we've always been allies, bring up the 1978 Bakke case, B-A-K-K-E, about affirmative action and ask them where they stood as a community in regards to affirmative action. Anytime it threatened their economic and political well-being, they turned against black folks. They turned against black folks. Now, what reason do black folks have to distrust Jewish people? When they try to talk about the Whoopi Goldbergs and other Nick Cannons, Professor Griff, what reason do black people have to not trust them? They have attacked our leaders. We already talked about the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and Andrew Young. Andrew Young. Why would they want to attack Andrew Young? For meeting with the PLO in the 70s. Now, a good book to read is They Dare to Speak Out by Paul Findley. They Dare to Speak Out by Paul Findley. It talks about how the Israel lobby went against politicians when they disagreed with their politics. Paul Findley's book, They Dare to Speak Out. Now, black entertainers have been attacked, especially during the hip-hop era. Especially during the hip-hop era. You might remember back in 1988, 88, 89, 89, Professor Professor Griff of Public Enemy, quoted Steve Coakley in an interview. I think the reporter's name was David Mills, if I'm not mistaken. And that interview had him kicked out of Public Enemy. An interview he did around 1988, early 89. Professor Griff became one of the first hip-hop artists to be labeled an anti-Semite. More recently, Professor Griff was on a program with Nick Cannon's show. And Nick Cannon was targeted. Nick Cannon, millions of dollars, he was targeted. And he went on an apology tour, apologizing. All he said was that black people were the original Hebrew Israelites. But he was made to apologize for just saying that. And the last one we're dealing with, talk about entertainers, it's Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg, like we mentioned last week or a couple of weeks ago, all she said was that she inferred that Judaism was not a race. That's all she did. And she came under fire. So they have a propensity to attack black leaders and black entertainers. I'm going to let y'all into a little secret they don't tell you. As much as they have attacked our entertainers for things they said, 20 years before NWA popularized the N-word, there was a Jewish comedian named Lenny Bruce. Read this book, The N-Word, The Strange Career of a Troublesome Word by Dr. Randall Kennedy. The Strange Career of a Troublesome Word by Dr. Randall Kennedy. 20 years before NWA popularized the N-word. In 1963, Leonard Allred Schneider, also known as, professionally known as Lenny Bruce, he thought that by saying the N-word over and over again, he could take the sting out of it. That was 1963, more than 20 years before NWA. So when we see entertainers using the N-word in hip-hop today, when they complain about, well, y'all use the N-word, and why can't we use the N-word? Because y'all use the N-word. Ask them about Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce. And how Lenny Bruce, in 1963, tried to popularize the N-word. Because he allegedly, apparently, according to him, thought if he said it long enough, it would take the sting out of it. So 20 years before Tupac, before NWA, before Ice Cube, before Ice-T, 1963, Lenny Bruce started using the N-word. White Jewish man. Now, one more reason for the lack of trust. According to a 1993 Los Angeles Times article, the Jewish organization ADL, Anti-Defamation League, spied on over 1,000 people, including Nation of Islam. They had a list, and this isn't me talking. This is a 1993 Los Angeles Times article. The Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, according to that article, spied on, had a list of 1,000 people they were spying on. 1,000 people. I think it was 950 organizations, if I'm not mistaken. So, if anybody has a reason to be distrustful, it's black folks. It's black folks. Now, as I get ready to close, they like to talk about their suffering and how their suffering was just as bad as black folks. They like to talk about how our ancestors going through the Ma'afa, and Ma'afa means in Swahili a time of great suffering. A time of great suffering. They like to talk about how their suffering was just as bad as our suffering. They like to say that even in North Carolina, they now have mandatory Holocaust education, where your black children have to learn about the Holocaust, but they fight against having your children learn black history. It's a law right now in North Carolina that black children, all public schools, have to teach about the Holocaust. But when we try to get mandatory black history, they fight against it. Most people don't know that's a law. It just became law 3 months ago. Because last year, lawmakers and activists tried to get black history added to the bill that was supposed to make black history, the Holocaust bill. We wanted black history added to that bill. We said that if you're going to make Holocaust history mandatory, you got to add black history. They said no. Your allies, your friends, your homies, they said no. The bill didn't pass the House, barely passed the House, because black folks and I think a Native American, indigenous lawmaker, politician said, wait a minute, what about the suffering of our people? So it barely passed the House. Then it went to, it never got to the Senate. But what happened was they had already put it in the budget. They buried it in the budget. So North Carolina hadn't had a budget pass in the last couple of years. So when they passed the budget last November, they buried the Holocaust education inside that budget on page 100 of an 800-page report. So when they passed the budget, they automatically made Holocaust education the law. And we're still fighting for black history. But they will say, well, no history, your suffering's not worse than our suffering. We went through this. And they will downplay. They will counsel you if you downplay their suffering. But they will downplay the slave trade, the lynchings. They will downplay Mary Turner having her belly cut open and having a white man snatch the baby out of her belly and step on it. Oh yeah, they downplay that. They downplay that. But Harold Cruse, but what's the difference? What is the difference? And I want you all to listen very closely. Harold Cruse said it like this. He said the difference is anti-Negroism, anti-blackness was historically rooted in inferiority. Anti-Negroism was historically rooted in inferiority, but anti-Semitism was never rooted in Jewish inferiority. Anti-Semitism was never rooted in Jewish inferiority. They didn't try to teach young Jewish children that they were inferior. But anti-blackness was rooted in black inferiority. That's the difference. That's the major difference. And I'll close on this. This is what you really got to hit them with, because this is their Bible of history. This is the book they use as their Bible of history. It's called The American Dilemma, The Negro Problem in Modern Democracy by Gunnar Myrdal. Gunnar Myrdal. He said, the difference in this respect between the Negro, now this was written back in 1944, that's why they say Negro. The difference in this respect between the Negro and other racial minorities, the Jews for example, is notable. The difference is not explainable simply in terms of differences in natural and cultural abilities between the two groups. A Jewish economist is not expected to be a specialist on Jewish labor. A Jewish sociologist is not assumed to confine himself always to studying the ghetto. A Jewish singer is not doomed eternally to perform Jewish folk song. A Jew is not out of place either as a governor of a state or a planner of world reconstruction. The Jew is discriminated against in America, but there is a quantitative difference between this and the discrimination against the Negro, which is so great that it becomes qualitative. This is the history book that most of their scholars quote from when they're dealing with race. An American Dilemma by Gunnar Myrdal. Myrdal. So brothers and sisters, I laid it out plain tonight. I gave you the documentation. So the next time someone talks about black people and black anti-Semitism, you have the information. What you do with that information is up to you. As always, we leave you with the Black Messiah motto: stop waiting for a Savior and be one. Shalom.